I'm Gabriel. Today we're going to talk about fraud proofs, specifically interactive fraud proofs. Non-interactive are a completely different beast, and we're not going to talk about them today. So who here would say they really know a lot about fraud proofs? Okay, one. All right, well, I hope I can teach you something new today. Otherwise, I hope everybody else will have a great time. So let's keep moving. I am a collaborator at Cartesi. So what I wanted to highlight about Cartesi is that we are an application-specific rollups project. And this application-specific is relevant to what I'm going to show next, because that has shaped the trade-offs that we chose for our own fraud-proof system. Here's the overall agenda, all the topics that we're going to cover today. So first is mostly the motivation. We want to scale Ethereum. Fraud proofs help us do that. But it's not enough just to have any kind of fraud proofs. We want fraud proofs to be permissionless. And I'm going to talk about the three main algorithms that today try to be permissionless. So I guess the main takeaway here today is that not all fraud-proof systems are the same. There are different trade-offs that they took. So why do we need fraud proofs? Of course, we want to onboard a lot of users. We want to improve UX. And Ethereum doesn't scale enough to that point. So we have the roll-up-centric roadmap. We want to scale Ethereum. But we want to scale it without sacrificing on security or decentralization. So I'm sure you all know that. That's a trilemma, you know. But it's really the critical point here, not to sacrifice the other ones to achieve scalability. So we have two main techniques to do that with rollups. First is ZK, the other is fraud proofs. And I just wanted to give like a reason, because there is a common opinion that ZK is like the end game, you know, like once we have good ZK provers and everything, there's no room for fraud proofs anymore. And I want to push back against that opinion because ZK is great, you know, there are many applications that are going to use it, but there's no silver bullet. Specifically, when we're talking about costs and throughput, ZK has a few disadvantages when compared to fraud proofs. So fraud proofs still have a very important niche for rollups. I love ZK, by the way. So let's talk about the essential primitive, like exactly how fraud proofs work. And if you learn anything today, learn this, which is fraud proofs doesn't find out the truth directly. It actually finds out who's lying. So that's it. It finds out who's lying. And if we optimistically assume there's one honest person who's telling the truth, that honest person will be able to prove everybody else is a liar, and thus the truth will be enforced. So it's not like directly. There's this indirection that we assume there's one honest person. And the cool thing is that this one honest person can be you, so you don't need to delegate trust to anybody else. You can just participate yourself and then enforce the correct result. So let's simplify our model. Let's suppose there's just two players, you know, and the blockchain. And those two players are the validators. They want to prove the result of a computation back to the blockchain. So the first thing they do is they agree on a state transition function. You can think of a state transition like a CPU instruction, you know, like a CPU tick. So it's something that moves the state forward. Then they also agree on an initial state. And they acquire the end result by taking the initial state and applying the state transition function over and over again until they get to the result. And that result is what they want to prove to the blockchain. So they will compute this result, send it to the blockchain. Now, if they agree, you know, if the blockchain look, okay, they're claiming the same thing, that's going to be accepted as the correct result. Otherwise, there will be a dispute initiated to try to find out the liar. So the first thing is a binary search. They do a binary search over the whole computation, trying to find out exactly where the first disagreement occurred. And once the first disagreement is identified, the blockchain can execute a single state transition function and decide who is lying. So that's like the basic essential primitive of how fraud proofs work. And, well, 2 players is nice, you know, but we actually want it for as many players as we want. And there are like 2 main high-level approaches of doing that. The first one is you do it sequentially, so you have multiple players joining in, and then you do many two-player verification games between all of them sequentially. And eventually, one player is going to survive, and that you assume to be the truth because you assume there's one honest person. And the other high-level approach is parallel, so everybody fights everybody absolutely at the same time. Okay, so now that you know the essential part, let's talk about the problems of making that permissionless. So we want three main goals. We want security, decentralization, and liveness. So you can kind of see that it has some like trilemma vibes, which isn't good news necessarily. So I'm going to dissect what those three criteria mean. So liveness is easy. You know, we want the roll-up to settle fast. We know that optimistic rollups usually take like a challenge, at least a challenge period to settle. And we don't want it to take a lot more than that. So that's liveness. But let's zoom in on security and decentralization. So security means that one honest validator can really defeat everybody else, you know? And it doesn't matter if you're fighting against a nation state. We want one single honest validator to bring all the adversaries to their knees, even if their adversary is a nation state. And the second thing we want is that you are able to become a validator. So if we take those two together, you know, you can be a validator, even if you're broke and your computer is a toaster, but you can join the protocol, and you alone are enough to defeat everybody else, then I can really argue that this system, you know, really inherits the security of Ethereum. As long as Ethereum is running and there are no bugs, really the truth will be enforced. So that's quite critical. And systems that require a lot of hardware or require like very high bonds or collaterals or stake really end up sacrificing a little bit of the decentralization. And we want it to be cheap to participate exactly for this reason. Okay, but we run into the main problem that all permissionless blockchains face, which is Sybil attacks. Sybil attacks is really the bane, the enemy of all permissionless blockchains, is that essentially an attacker creating many personas and trying to attack and shift the consensus into their favor. And what happens is that really messes up permissionless fraud proofs. So here's an example. This is a post by Ed Felton from 2020, I think, where he shows that the then current protocol that Ethereum was using not Ethereum, Arbitrum was using for fraud proofs, there was a way to launch a Sybil attack that could delay finality for a very long time, you know? And it was essentially linear. How many funds that the attacker had, they could keep spending more funds and delay it like proportionally, linearly. So you can't take a system that is vulnerable in this way and make it permissionless, because if you do, somebody could attack it and you lose finality, so that's not something you want. So you lose liveness. You don't want to lose liveness. And it turns out that it's quite hard to have all three of them at the same time. So what happens is that I guess there are three main solutions today, you know, three main systems, algorithm designs. And because it's quite hard to land on all those three criteria at the same time, each of them ended up taking a different trade-off. As I said, we are application specific, so we took a specific trade-off that is different from Arbitrum and Optimism. So the three main designs are ours. The algorithm is called permissionless referee determinants. Then there is Arbitrum, bold, and then we have also Optimism fault-proof system. And the good news is that these three, which are like the state-of-the-art, the latest, the best we have, are really great improvements on what we had before, so that's very good news. But there's still a lot of room to improve, exactly because of Sybil attacks, because they can't all ideally fulfill all three of those currently. But I'm optimistic we can find a good solution. So if you want to read about the way those three can kind of be like weakened, there's this post I made on Leaf Research if you want to check it out. It has kind of like a clickbaity title, which is Fraud Proofs Are Broken. That was perhaps too harsh. But the overall point is really that those three systems are much better than everything we had before, but there's still room to improve. So I have a quick summary if you don't want to dig. I mean, if you want to dig the details, it's quite fun, but The summary is kind of like this, like permissionless referee tournaments, PRT, hours. Because it's application specific, there's not necessarily a lot of money going on, not necessarily a lot of activity. We've really hard optimized for security and decentralization. But we ended up giving up liveness. So it's quite cheap. You only need a laptop, and you can defeat essentially a nation state. So that's very nice. But settlement can be delayed. But it's not linearly as the previous problem that I showed from Arbitrum. It's at least logarithmically. So it's it's better. But the constant's still pretty high. So, the trade-off we took. And Bolt and Optimism, they took a more parallel high-level approach that I talked about before, which I guess makes sense because they're large, shared, they have a lot of money, so they can afford, supercomputers and higher stakes. So they really optimized for liveness, but they ended up losing a bit of security and decentralization, but also in different ways. So it kind of looks like they're the same from this table. I don't want to give that impression. So if you want to get into the details on how they're different, I suggest you read that post that I showed you. And on our side, we are researching new techniques to try to improve that yellow liveness right there on our algorithm, because we really want everything to be green. And we're putting in the effort. We're not satisfied with the current situation. We really want to reach this end game of fraud proofs where every columns rather are green. Yeah. So I guess that's it. Thank you very much. So if you want to, it stopped working. Can you pass one slide, please? OK, so that's the link to our Discord. We're doing all our development publicly. All our discussions are held publicly. So if you want to join, please, you're invited. Just, join our Discord. Thank you so much.